Hello, stitchy friends, it's Shari. Today I want to share with you a fun fall project using some Poshta design dies. Now these are the Falling Leaves 2 die set. I actually have them on the same magnetic sheet as the Falling Leaves. Here are the Falling Leaves for comparison. So I think this is a really fun collection of leaves if you have both of them. Now I am using mostly colors from the Hayride color story, so you can see them there. And I have some fabric. This is some Lori Holt Autumn collection fabric, and I have actually fused this to some fusible fleece and cut this down. So this is 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches, and this tiny little pillow is where I am going to sew my acorn. So the main part of the acorn is cut from morel colored felt, and the cap is cut from furrow. Now you could go ahead and stitch the two pieces together through the center where they connect before you stitch these onto the panel, but I am actually just going to go ahead and start stitching onto the panel. I am stitching around the cap first, and I'm using the floss that matches the morel felt, so that lighter felt, because I wanted the contrasting stitch to show up. And what I'm going to do is stitch all the way around the cap with a running stitch. So I started in the center of the cap at the bottom, and I'm just going around. And this is going to give you that like skipped stitch look, which you may have noticed in my finished project. That was the look I stuck with. Now for the stem, I did go up and come back down, so both of the stitches for the stem are filled in, but for the rest of the cap, I kept it looking every other stitch filled in, and I did not go back. Now that just depends on what look you want for your project, but I liked that look on this one, to just do every other stitch and not go back around. But if you wanted a solid line, of course, you could go back in the other direction and fill in the stitches that are missing. So I've gone all the way around. I'm going to stop here and tie this off, and then I can trim off that excess thread. So there's that kind of skip stitch look around the cap. So now I'm ready to stitch on the bottom part of the acorn, and I am switching over to that darker floss. So this is the floss that matches the furrow, which is the cap. And you could do a running stitch all the way around and back through, just depending on the look you want. But for mine, I'm going to do more of an applique stitch. So I'm coming up through the hole, then I am going straight across to the edge and putting my needle down through the fabric right outside the edge of the felt. And this is going to give me that look of an applique. It's not exactly a blanket stitch because we're not catching our thread on the outside edge. We're not creating a line on that outside edge. It's definitely more of an applique stitch. So you just come up through the hole, take a perpendicular line over to the edge, and then come in right beside the felt. And so for this, I do like to use a sharper point needle because I am piercing that fabric, which I did for the cap as well. I just forgot to mention it. I like to use a dull needle when I'm just going through pre-cut holes, but in this case, I am having to pierce through that fabric and the fusible fleece that's on the back. So this is a really fun look with that applique stitch. I think it would be fun to use a contrasting color in any color. At this point, I decided I wanted to be puffed up just a little bit. So I'm taking the smallest little bit of polyfill, this just little piece, and tucking it in there very gently. And this is just going to give my little acorn a little bit of shape, so it's not so flat on the pillow. Now I can continue my applique stitch the rest of the way around. And I really do love that tool that I use to stuff that in. That is a stuffing tool from Benzie Design, and it works really well for stuffing things because it has a little bit of teeth at the end, so it really grabs that polyfill and makes it easy to push that in. So once I've completed the rest of the stitching around this acorn, I'm just going to tie it off on the back by going underneath one of the stitches there and then back through my loop a couple times to tie a knot, and then I can trim off those tails. And it really doesn't matter what this looks like because it is all going to be hidden. Now I didn't actually tie off the beginning, so I'm doing that here with a short little string. You could also add a little dot of glue if you were unable to tie the knot very well, and that would keep it secure so it wouldn't come loose once we put our project together. Now, I did decide I wanted a little bit of embellishment on this acorn. He was a little too plain, so I have some thin hemp twine. This is orange lawn fawn twine, and I'm just taking two pieces and tying it into a little tiny bow. So once I get that bow shaped and the size I want, I'll pull it all tight and trim off the excess ends. And then I'm actually going to sew this bow right to the stem of the acorn, and I'm just using one strand of floss to do this. I'm actually going to tie it off on the back first. Then I'm going to come up right at the stem, right through the hole that's there, and feed this through the knot of the bow. Just very carefully, don't stab yourself, but I'm just going to kind of whip stitch this bow in place with a couple stitches. And I'm hiding that thread on the back side of the bow, so I'm not coming in front of the bow, it's going through the knot, so it's going to be hidden on the front side and you won't see it. Just be very careful when doing this because you kind of have to push it through that knot a little harder and you don't want to poke yourself. So I only went through twice and then I will tie it off on the back. You could also secure this with a dot of glue once you're finished if you wanted to. Let's take a look at the second pillow. This one has two pieces of cotton fabric sewn together to make a ground line. Then I iron the fusible fleece to the back and trim this down to be a 6.5-inch square. So whatever you want your pillow to be, add a 1/2 inch for your seam allowances. I am lining this up on my mat so I can see where the center line is and I can center up that tall skinny tree right in the middle. I'm adding 2 little dots of tacky glue. Make sure that you avoid the holes if you do this to hold it in place. This will just kind of hold it in place so it doesn't shift around while I do my stitching. So I am going to stitch that center tree on first, and I have the coordinating colors pulled out here, and I want to use those colors but on a different color tree. So I'm just figuring out here which floss looks the best on which tree. So for this, I have smoked paprika, squash, and sunflower as the colors of my trees. And I'm starting out with the center one. You can see it's kind of holding it in place there when I pick it up because of those 2 little dots of glue, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want it to do, especially since this is not on the side of the pillow. It's in the center, so a clip doesn't work very well in this situation. So I'm starting out with 3 strands of floss, which I know I forgot to say earlier when doing the acorn, but I usually always stitch with 3 strands unless I'm adding embellishments. And I'm coming up the center where that trunk is, and I'm going to go all the way up the middle with a running stitch, and I will go all the way from the base of the tree to the top. Then as I start to come back down the trunk of the tree, I'm going to branch out to, let's say, the branches, which they're the veins of the leaf, obviously, but as I get to where one of those connects to this center line, I will run out each one with a running stitch and come back to the center. I think this is a very efficient way to stitch the inside part of all of these leaves. So you can see these 2 at the top are taking shape, and then once I get those done, I will just continue down that center spine onto the next one. So I'm down here at the last ones at the bottom. I've already done the one on the right. I'm going out the one on the left and then back towards the center with my running stitch. And then I will continue all the way down, filling in all the way to the bottom. So I am actually going to go ahead and tie this off down here at the bottom, even though I still have a lot of thread left, and I'm going to start my applique stitch around the tree. So the same as I did on the acorn, I'm coming up through the hole, then I'm going to go straight out to the edge and into the fabric right outside the edge of the felt. So I'm not piercing the felt, I'm going right beside it. So I did zoom in a little bit, so hopefully you can see exactly what I'm doing on this tree. And I am doing the same stitch that I did on the acorn, and I'm going to repeat this on all of the trees. Now I did want to skip ahead to the point up here at the top because I did do something a little different up here. So we have one hole at the top, and you could go straight out to the point at the top, but actually what I decided to do was to take 2 stitches. So I'm going to go over here to the left, then come up through that same hole, and then go over to the right. So I have a little V shape at the top of my point. I just think that that is kind of a nice look and probably is a little easier to get nice and clean than to try to go at that very, very top point of the felt. But it just depends on the look you want. Either way would work. And now I'm going to continue down the other side of my leaf, finishing off this applique stitch all the way to the bottom. And just look how cute that is. It also, to me, looks like a feather. I think this would be a fun feather design if you did a bunch of these really skinny leaves together. So I'll just tie this off at the bottom now that I've gone all the way around with my applique stitches. This tree is done. So now I can take my other 2 trees and I'm going to do the exact same method. So a few little dots of glue, and this will hold them in place. You want to make sure you're not too close to the edge because remember we are going to turn this into a pillow, so there's a little bit of a seam allowance, so some of that is going to be sewn together on the edge. So you want to keep that in mind when you place your trees. Now I did do sort of the same thing with this tree. I went up the center with a running stitch and came back down. But instead of going out each branch as I came back down, I went ahead and filled in the whole center spine of the tree or the trunk of the tree. And then I snaked my stitches back up. So I thought I would show you this in case you forget to go out each branch, which is actually what I did. I just kind of forgot because I was just stitching away. But I thought I'd keep this in here to show you how you can do this without going out each one each time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie off. So you can see I've only gone up the center. You can really see it well on the back side here. I'm tying off, but I'm not trimming it off. And what I'm going to do is figure out where that next vein is. So I kind of just snaked my stitches up underneath the stitches of the trunk. Now you could just go straight to where that branch is that comes out, but I think this keeps it a little nicer and neater on the inside. So I'm going out this branch, I'll come back to the center, and then I will do the one on the other side. And then when I'm ready to move up to the next one, I'm just kind of feeding my thread underneath the threads on the back until I get up to where that next branch comes into the center. And like I said, that just kind of tacks everything down and keeps it nice and clean on the back. And you can see I am fast forwarding to where I've done all those branches. And now I'm done and I can just run my thread underneath one of those stitches, back through, make a loop, and tie this off. Now I don't have enough string to do the applique on this one, so I did have to get a new piece, but just like all the other ones, I'm doing that same stitch, coming up through the hole, going out perpendicular, and then coming in right on the edge of the felt. Now, when we get over here to where it's overlapping, we're going to be piercing through that tree we already did. So it is important to remember which ones are in the background and which ones are in the foreground. So you want to stitch those background trees first because you are going to overlap them just like we're doing here. Now I did want to show you how I did the applique stitch on these inside corners of this leaf. Our other leaf did not have any inside corners like this, so I wanted to keep this in here. So we have 2 holes, but they're going to go to the same spot on the outside edge. So there's one, and then here's the second. We're going to go right back where that was, so we put both those stitches in the corner of that leaf, and we make a little V shape with our stitches. And then we'll just continue on until we get to the next inside corner and do the same. So we've gone all the way around. I'm back to the beginning down here, and I'm going to finish that off. And I did want to point out that I only do these applique stitches around the leaf. I did not applique where the stem or the trunk of the leaf is, only from that base of the trunk up. And then I can add my third little leaf, and I'm trying to make sure that the trunks of the trees or the stems of the leaves are equal distant apart across that ground line that I created. Then for this one, I added the little glue dots just as before, put it in place, and I will stitch just as I did before, up the center, do all the interior parts before I do the applique on the outside. So I've stitched all the way around this one. At the tip of this one, because it's a point, I did like I did on the red one and did 2 stitches in that top hole and made a little V shape up there so that the point does not have a stitch going all the way to the tip. And then of course I will tie this one off, and all my little trees are all stitched to my pillow front. Now we need to do any embellishing with sequins or beads before we sew this together and make it a pillow. And I actually tend to forget this a lot, and sometimes just gluing the sequins on is the way to go if you forget. But I'm trying to figure out where I want them to be, and then I take a picture with my phone so that I can move them off to the side and pick them up individually. Because obviously, when I pick this up, they're all going to fall off. But if you want to figure out where your placement is of all your sequins beforehand, this is a little tip that I do with cards and all kinds of projects is figure out where my embellishments go, take a quick picture with your phone, and then you know exactly where you had them placed. And for these leaves or trees, I'm using the matching color of sequin from the Hayride Color Story, but I'm using a contrasting bead, which I think gives it a really fun look. I'm sewing each of them on with one strand of floss, and I'm varying the sizes. So I have 2 for each tree color. One is a large sequin and one is the smaller sequin. And I am using a thin, sharp needle for this because I'm piercing through all those layers. And also I want to make sure it is a thin enough needle to where the bead will go over the eye of the needle. And I will just tie off these little groupings of beads. I don't want to run my string all over the back of the pillow. I am going to skip ahead a little bit. I have all these sequins on the leaves. I actually do come back and add even more to this. And I do have a little tip that you could add a dot of glue and let it dry on the back side to really hold these sequins in place, because I have had some come loose before once my project was done, which is very sad if you lose a sequin. So a little dot of glue on that thread will definitely hold it in place. I'm adding a few little sequins to my acorn. And I'm just going right through all that polyfill to add those in place. And once I added those kind of white creamy sequins to that, I thought, oh, I should probably add some of those to the sky of this pillow onto that fabric that has the fun text on it. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just going back and adding even more sequins to the sky around my trees. And of course, since this is kind of evolving process, I decided to go in and just add a single bead to my trees as well in that coordinating color. So now I have the rule of 3 on each tree. I have a large sequin with a bead, a small sequin with a bead, and then just a bead by itself. So each tree has a lot of embellishment on it. I just think that it's so pretty because it catches the light and gives it even more interest. This tree, I think I actually put 2 because it is very tall. But once you have all your embellishing done, it is time to sew these together. Like I said before, this one is cut to 6.5 inches square, which will give me a 6-inch pillow once it's sewn together. And my little tiny one is 3.5 inches, which will make a 3-inch pillow, which is super tiny. Be patient with this really small pillow. I do have my fabric cut for the back side of each one. For this one, I'm using a matching one. We're going to put the right sides together like I've done here, and we're going to pin it so it stays in place, and we're going to leave an opening on the back side. This one has that same material, that's the sky. That's going to be the back side for the large one. So I've just lined up my squares that are cut to the same size, and I am pinning so that they stay together and they don't shift around. I want my little sandwich and my corners and everything to line up perfectly. And then I'm actually going to mark with a pin where to leave my opening to turn it. And that's really a reminder to me so that I don't just keep sewing and end up with it sewn all the way around or with an opening too small to turn the pillow, which I have done many, many times. And a really small opening, you think I can do it, but it's pretty hard. So now I'm pinning my little one together. This is really important for this one because it kind of has that poofiness of the acorn, and so it's really important to kind of pin those edges together. And I'll mark this one too. I'm gonna make sure this one's pretty wide. I don't wanna go too close to the corners, but I wanna make sure it's big enough to squeeze that acorn through. So I've taken these to my sewing machine and you can see I've sewn around. I've stopped where I made those marks. And I have found lately that kind of finger pressing the seam open at that opening makes it easier to close the pillow up later. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just folding those edges back and kind of finger pressing them. Then you're going to trim off the corners. Be sure you don't trim them too close to your sewing, to your seam. You want your seam to stay intact. You don't want anything to come loose. And then we're going to turn them, and we're going to turn them carefully because we have those sequins and that lovely stitching we did. This is why you don't want your hole too small because you don't want that felt to get all crunched up or torn because we know felt, has some give to it. We want to be careful with our turning. So once I get it turned, I do have my little corner tool here to push out the corners, which is what I'm going to do carefully. You don't want to poke it through. So carefully turn out the corners. Then I will take this to my iron and iron around the edges. I didn't really iron through the middle because I obviously have sequins and embellishments and felt, but I really want to iron those seams, especially this one that I pressed to the inside. So I'll take these to my iron and iron those flat once I get them turned. This one I was a little concerned about turning because it's so small, but it actually went pretty quickly. I did pretty well. I didn't have my opening too small, and I'm just pressing out those corners with my corner turner, and I'm going to press the seams of this one too. So I have ironed these flat. You can see they're a little flatter. While I was at the iron, I ironed on my little label on the big one. I decided to leave it off the small one because it is so small. But now we need to fill these. And I'm actually going to use some wool roving. You can use polyfill, you can use whatever you like. I like to use wool roving for stuffing unless it's something super huge. Now with wool roving, it comes in this big long roll. You want to cut off a chunk of it and then loft it with your fingers, which is what I'm doing here, which is pulling it apart, making it all fluffy. You do the same thing with the polyfill, but you can take these little pieces and stuff it in. And this is that stuffing tool again, which has these little teeth on the end and kind of grabs onto it and really lets you push it into the corners much better than like the chopstick kind of tool that comes with the bag of polyfill. And my little tip for this is loft it more than you think you need and stuff more in than you think you need because it's going to take more than you think. You want your pillow to be nice and stuffed and nice and tight. You don't want it to be kind of lumpy and slumpy. You also want to make sure you stuff it up into those corners really well. And then before I completely fill it, what I usually do is add some heavier material. So you can use walnut shells, which I have used before, or you could use poly pellets, which is what I'm using today. So this is my little container of poly pellets. This is just plastic like polyfill, but it is in pellet form, so it's heavy and dense. And this just gives some weight to your pillows so that they stand up in your dough bowl nicely. Now, I don't have any kind of special tools for this. I made a funnel out of paper, and that's how I get these pieces in there. I do recommend finding something to set your pillow in to catch the bits that maybe don't get inside the pillow, and it will hold it up too and give you a free hand for stuffing. So there is my really technical paper funnel, but this one was so small and I wanted so little at a time that I actually just used my little measuring spoon on my desk to scoop up some pellets and kind of stuff them in. and you can kind of stuff them down in there, and then you're going to add some more wool roving or polyfill on top to kind of close in the hole and make sure those pellets stay down in there. They do move around a lot as you stuff. You might have one come out. Just be aware of that. I'm always aware because I don't want it on the floor where my dog might get a hold of it. So that's why I like to do this on my desk with a bowl or something that can catch the pieces that do come out. I think this one is stuffed pretty well, so I am going to close it up. And I pulled out some thread that matches my fabric pretty well, and we're going to close this up with a ladder stitch. And I have a nice, really thin, sharp needle here that I like to use for this. I'm tying a knot at the end of my thread, which is kind of hard to see because this is very thin thread. But I'm tying a knot at the end. I'll trim off the extra tail past the knot. And then what I do is I go inside and come up through the seam. That's where my knot's going to get hidden inside. And then a ladder stitch is just what it sounds like. We're going to make a ladder. So we're going to go through the seam, and then we're going to ladder across to the other side and go through the seam on the other side. I did have a little string in my way, and I tuck that in there. So we're just going to kind of grab a little chunk right through that seam. Then we'll come over and do it on the other side. And when you look at this, it's almost like a zigzag. It creates a ladder across the opening. So I like to do a couple stitches and then pull it taut, and it will kind of cinch that up. I don't like to pull it too tight. I don't want it to pucker. But this does take a little practice to get it nice and even. I think I do pretty good on my ladder stitches. You could always add some trim with some glue or whip stitch some trim on to cover this up on a pillow too. I just didn't actually add any trim to the pillows that I made today. So again, we're going to grab that little chunk through the seam, through that ironed seam, or that ironed fold, I should say. It's not really the seam. And then we're going to move over and get a chunk on the other side. And I like to kind of hold my pieces together sort of like I'm doing here. It helps me line up when I go from one side to the other so that it's more perpendicular and I'm not kind of offsetting or going at a diagonal, because I think that helps keep it from puckering too much. So here I'm going to hold it on both sides. It's a little easier to see. And once I get over here to the end, I'm just going to loop through a couple times and tie it off in a knot. It's looking pretty good. Make sure it's nice and tight, and then I can thread that needle through the pillow, out the back side, and trim it off. So I'm tying my little knot here, going through a couple times. And then I pulled my needle off, so I'm going to re-thread that needle, go through that seam and out the back side, and then I can just trim off that string. And now that tail is hidden inside this tiny pillow. It's just so cute. All right, we're going to do the same thing to this one. I've already stuffed it with a whole bunch of wool roving, and I'm moving on to adding in my poly pellets. So I have my little dish here to stand it up in. For this one, I am going to use my homemade paper funnel because I am going to use a lot more of these. Now, these do come in a bag. I've just used the bag so much that there's not a lot left. And instead of pouring out of a giant half-empty bag, I just put them in this container to hold them. And the opening on this pillow is big enough that I can kind of get both my fingers down in there and start pushing those poly pellets down and kind of making a little opening in the center, a void in the middle for them to go down in. Just kind of shaking them around, making sure they get on both sides. I'm going to pull out my little stuffing tool and make sure that wool is stuffed into the edges. And you don't need a whole bunch of these. You don't want to fill it up too much because you do want to leave room for some more wool roving stuffed in that top there. So let me get some more wool roving lofted here, and I'm going to tuck that in the top and kind of cover up those poly pellets. I want to make sure those corners are nice and stuffed too. This one is going to take another little piece of wool roving to finish it off. And once I get that kind of tucked in there, up in those edges and those corners, I like to kind of pinch it closed. You can hold it closed with a clip if you need to. This opening isn't really big enough to do that, but if it was a much bigger pillow, I have done that before to kind of help those two edges stay lined up. So just like the other one, I tied a knot in my string. I came up from the inside, so my knot's inside, and I'm just taking a little bite out of that folded seam on one side, crossing over to the other side and taking a little bite out of that one. And you can see I'm going to do a couple little stitches to create that ladder, and then I will pull it taut. So when I pull it like this, it cinches it up and gives it a nice finished look. So now that I've gotten all the way across, I'm just going through a couple times, making a loop, tying a knot. I used thread that matches the back fabric this time, so I can come through the back and trim this off. And now this little pillow is finished too. So now I have this little duo of fall pillows for my dough bowl. I did want to add a little more embellishment to this one, so I have this hemp twine. I'm actually going to wrap it around a couple times right along that line where my two fabrics meet. Then I'm going to tie a bow over here on the side. And actually, once I got that bow tied, I decided I wanted a little heftier bow, so I'm actually taking this off. I'm going to double up my twine, making it two pieces. You can see I cut where it overlapped and tie the two together. So I have a double bow, so it has a little more heft to it because it's two pieces. Pull that nice and tight. Just kind of get it the size I want. And then I'm going to tack it down. I want to make sure this doesn't move. So I'm making sure that it is exactly as I want it. Trim off the excess tails of this twine. And then I'm going to tack it the same way I tacked the little bow onto the acorn. This one I do need to be a little more careful with how I tack it in here because I'm doing it on the front. I don't have a place to hide it. So I'm using that same cream colored thread. I went through and now I'm going back up through the knot of the bow. So I'm going through the pillow, like a little bite out of the pillow, and then I take like a little bite out of the knot. So the pillow and the knot, you can kind of see it better there how I'm sort of just tacking it down. Then I can tie a knot by going through the stitches I've already done. Actually came up at the top. And it's catching on my sequins just a little bit. So I guess I went through a couple more times because I really just did not want this to move. So it's really not going to move now because I think I've gone through that knot about 10 times at this point. I don't even know how many, but I do need to tie it off. So I'm going to take a little bite of fabric here, then go back through the loop and give myself a knot. It's kind of hard to see because this thread is very thin. And I'm going to do it more than once. I did lose my needle here. So through the loop, and then I can stab this all the way through my pillow, out the back, and trim it. And now I have my cute little fall leaves, fall tree pillow, and my cute little acorn pillow. And I just think these turned out so much fun. I like the idea of having a different way to use these felt pieces than just making ornaments. So here is a final look at these two little pillows. I hope this has inspired you to look at your stitching dies and maybe try out an applique type of project. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.